This happened to me just a few years ago while I was still in college during the winter break. If there ever was a break for me during college, I would usually drive back to my hometown where my parents live so that I could spend time with them. It was a pretty long drive, but I didn't want to end up getting a motel because they're really creepy and dirty, and I remember the last time I stayed in one, junkies broke into my car. If possible, I usually don't stop for anything other than gas while driving long distances. But on that night, during the winter break, I succumbed. I was cruising along the highway that night when I found myself getting a little drowsy, and even got to the point where I was catching myself dozing off. To me, driving when you haven't slept is the same as driving drunk, so I decided not to take the risk. At the point where I was on the highway, I knew there wasn't a motel for a good few miles, so instead of taking the time to find one, I just pulled onto a deserted rest stop off the highway to get some rest. The rest stop was right next to some forest and it even had an outhouse. I let out a sigh of relief as I had been holding in a dump for almost the entire trip. I shut off the car and climbed out into the cold air. I approached the outhouse, stepped inside, and locked the door. Under normal circumstances, I would never have even considered using a dirty outhouse off the side of a highway, but I was pretty desperate and I knew I would sleep much more comfortably if I dropped the weight before doing so. As I sat in the outhouse, all I could hear was the sound of trees blowing in the soft winter breeze, sending a chill throughout my body. Just after that was when I first heard it. The sound of slow footsteps thumping around the woods behind me, and also what sounded like heavy breathing. I froze, trying to stay as quiet as I could, listening to this person wander around. I must have sat there for 10 minutes just listening. It didn't sound like they were going away either. Eventually, the person started to get closer to the outhouse, moving around it until they were right behind the door. I was then startled by 5 hard pounds on the door which shook the entire outhouse. I immediately began to finish up and assumed the person just wanted to use the bathroom. That was when I began to wonder what someone would be doing in the forest next to a deserted highway at this time of night. As I finished, I yanked my pants back up. The outhouse began to shake violently as the person outside began to pull on the door. As if their life depended on it. So I decided to call out to them. 1 second! But nothing changed. The door continued to shake like crazy for another 30 seconds and then stopped suddenly. I then heard them walk back around to the other side. My heart was racing by this time, so I cautiously unlocked the door, planning to make a run to my car. I shoved the door open and nearly fell over as I stumbled out of the outhouse and bolted to the driver's side of my car, jumping in and starting it up. I turned my head and looked out the passenger side to see the face of a crazed man pressed up against the window. He had a wide, toothy grin and eyes wider than the freaking moon. He slammed his hands against the glass, shrieking with a maniacal laughter. I yelled at him, "What the heck do you want?" He then reached down and tried to open the passenger door. With that, I threw the car into drive and sped out of the rest stop, swerving onto the highway. I looked in the rearview mirror to see him standing underneath the one lamppost, watching me drive away. I kept driving, speeding down the highway and not stopping for anything. After about 45 minutes, I decided to pull into a gas station and take a short break and calm down a little. Things like that are precisely why I don't stop to sleep on a long trip. It's been a few years now, but the image of that crazed man's face is still lingering in my mind. And may I ask, aside from the story, if anybody decides to stop at a rest stop, please be cautious. I was driving the annual 5-hour drive to my cousin's house where my extended family meets every Christmas. I had just gotten out of that class that evening, so I was about 3 hours in around 1 to 2 a.m.-ish. I stopped by a rest stop because I really needed to go to the restroom. Now, I've been to this rest stop many times before. I've been going since I was a kid, and It's always been between my house and my cousin's house. It's a little vacant, but usually around Christmas there's a couple of families there in the day, and a few lone truckers or drivers in the night. Let me first describe the layout of the rest stop first. It's somewhat forested by the road, and it's almost laid out like a camping outpost. There's a square in the middle with some bulletin boards and vending machines. The front half of the car, or square, I said car. The front half of the square next to the parking lot has a set of bathrooms, and the back half has another set. I'd show you the image, but it's really bad. So anyways, I parked and noticed this time, it was completely empty. It was late at night, but even the road was quieting down. There were no cars, and it just felt really eerie to be there. But I ignored this. I walked from my car and got to the middle of the first half of the square, where I could see straight across, which was maybe 30 to 40 feet away. There I realized there was somebody, really tall, like 7 feet tall, just standing out of the light of the lamppost, all the way across the area. He was just standing there, watching me. I don't know what else he could have been doing, so I froze and thought about it. There was no way that I could possibly do anything against somebody 3 times my size. I was even more terrified on the fact that if I went into the girls' restroom and came out, he'd be standing right in front of the door. So I turned around and started back to my car. He started walking the same direction too, keeping the same horizontal pace with me, while moving a little diagonally, slowly closing the distance. When he gets almost halfway to me, I run to my car, too scared to even look behind me. I hear him running across the grass, so I hopped in my car, backed up as fast as I could, and I sped off. I saw him maybe 15 feet away from my car and getting extremely close, so I peeled to the left, speeding back onto the highway, not looking back. It was the last part that really keeps me shaking up after that, though. Before, I was able to think that maybe he was a janitor or maybe a random person who had just happened to be going in the same direction as me. That wasn't the case because the parking lot was empty, no one was out there. So I was wondering how or why he was even there. I saw no other cars. And I'll never forget that moment where I just froze like a deer in the headlights, seeing him just standing still across that rest area. I don't go to rest stops anymore at night, and when I go to them in the day, I am always extremely cautious. So I've decided to take some time to tell you guys my terrifying experience that I have had with a rest stop. And after this happened to me, I can guarantee you I won't ever stop at one again. So let me just jump right into the story. I recently landed a position in sales with a very solid company in the medical device industry. Being in my mid-20s, I am thrilled to work for such an innovative company. The money is great, the job is fun, and they even gave me a company vehicle. That's a pretty great perk. The only downside to this job is that my sales territory is quite expansive and covers several states, and because of budget constraints, they expect me to drive to most of my customers. I cannot complain though. Not many people my age get these kinds of opportunities. Anyway, so I finished up my workday at a hospital in central Pennsylvania. That was when I received a phone call from a clinic in western New York that wanted to place a buy for my products, but before they could do so, they wanted a demo. Not wanting to lose the opportunity, I agreed to be there by 9 a.m. My GPS showed the trip to be 5 hours if I took a highway that cut through a forest. Being now that it was 5 p.m., I figured that I could definitely make the drive now since I had packed with extra scrubs, toiletries, and product manuals for my current trip. But before I could head comfortably on the road, I headed up to the gas station, filled up my SUV, purchased some more snacks and 2 energy drinks, and then after that, hopped into my car, got onto the highway, and headed north towards New York State. It was the middle of November and it was quite cold, with the sun setting early and giving way to darkness in the late afternoon. By the time I had started my drive, it was already dark. Thick clouds were obscuring the moonlight. A wall of trees surrounded my vehicle on both sides, making it seem that I was driving my SUV through a tunnel of woods and darkness. The headlights from my vehicle illuminating the staggered white lines separating the lanes of the highway were the only source of light. The drive definitely took on an ominous feel, but I thought nothing of it as I slugged back my energy drinks and listened to some comedy podcasts to pass the time. When I was about 2 hours into my drive, the inevitable happened when one had large amounts of caffeine and a belly full of gas station snacks. So, I had to find a restroom. Eventually. Which I was okay with because I wanted to get out of the car and stretch my legs anyway. I had passed a small town 15 miles back, and I knew that I would need to find another one and pull off the highway to see if there's a rest stop anywhere. Almost as if fate had heard me beckoning, I saw a sign that said, "Rest area 2 miles." Well, this is my lucky night, I thought, as I realized that I would have to resort to relieving myself in the middle of the woods on a dark and creepy night. Or at least I would not have to. Anyway, I came across the rest area, which was located right off the side of the highway. It was nothing like the rest areas one is used to encountering on major highways. There weren't any restaurants or vending machines. There was a single lonely picnic table and a garbage can on a patch of grass in 2 separate brick buildings with brown metal roofs on them. A single overhead street lamp barely illuminated my oasis as it was flickering on and off. Probably from neglect, considering how remote this place was and how little use it was getting. The building to the left housed the ladies' room, while the one to the right housed the men's room. I placed my car in park of the one of the 10 available spots in front of the buildings, grabbed my phone to keep me entertained while I took care of my business. As I walked on the narrow concrete walkway towards the restrooms, I caught a glimpse of something in the woods behind the rest area, but it was dark outside and the overhead light provided too little illumination to discern what I was looking at. All I can remember seeing was that I saw an obscure black shape shifting through the thick trees. It could have simply just been my eyes playing tricks on me since I had spent the better part of the day either in a brightly lit operating room or driving down a pitch black highway. I shrugged my shoulders and made my way into the men's room. There were 3 stalls at the far end of the restroom flanking 3 urinals. 2 flimsy overhead lights with exposed bulbs were the only sources of light. One of the panels had a bulb completely out and the other was flickering sporadically, making the entire room look like it was lit by strobe lights in a nightclub. Just perfect, I thought. I'm stuck in the creepiest bathroom in the world and I can barely see anything. But I decided not to make a big deal about it. I'd be back on the road shortly. I took the stall in the middle. I had no reason why, I just simply wanted to select that one. I sat down and nearly jumped from how cold the seat was. This was becoming quite an annoyance. At that moment, I had no idea, but things were about to get a whole lot worse. As I was in the midst of doing my business, the lights went completely out this time. Of all the times that this pathetic single tubular bulb could have called it quits, it had to do so when I was using a restroom in one of the most isolated spots in the state. You've got to be kidding me, I groaned out loud. At this point, the light from my phone was the only source of light cutting through the shroud of darkness that crept over the entire room. It was only at this point that I realized how quiet it had been this entire time. Aside from sound of the slight breeze outside hitting the building, it was dead silent. I sat there in silence playing games on my phone when I first heard it. At first it sounded like a faint shuffling sound, the obscure noise of someone or something making its way towards the entrance of the restroom. I found this rather odd because I would have had another vehicle pull up since the parking lot was right across from the 2 buildings. The shuffling then became more discernible. It was footsteps. Slow, trudging footsteps were making their way into the restroom. By how loud they were, whoever or whatever this was had entered the room. As the footsteps continued, I noticed that they were making a slapping sound against the tile floor. It was as if the person or thing was barefoot. The footsteps became heavier and louder, and I noticed that they were moving towards the stalls. I locked my phone screen and sat there frozen with fear. My heart was pounding out of my chest and sweat started to creep across my brow despite the chill in the air. By this point, along with the heavy slapping footsteps, I heard the breathing. This thing's breathing was too otherworldly to be human. It took long, heavy animal-like breaths and exhaled in a way that resembled an asthmatic, with a faint whistle at the end. I had never heard such a thing before. By this point, my bowels were completely voided from fear, and I was grateful that I had been sitting on that toilet because I would have pooped myself if I had not been. This foreboding presence continued to trudge towards me until I heard its heavy breaths right outside the door to the stall. In the pitch-black restroom, all I could hear was this thing breathing a mere few feet away from me. Now certain that I was aware of my presence, my heart continued to pound as I heard it shuffle around outside of the stall. I had never felt so helpless in my life. I was trapped here at the mercy of this creature. After what I imagined was several minutes, the breathing quieted down some. I had pulled my feet up and I was squatted on the toilet in fear of this thing seeing me. I knew that it was still there, but for whatever reason, call it curiosity or perhaps a fear-induced lack of judgment, I took out my phone, flicked up the flashlight, and pointed it at the floor underneath the stall door entrance. I nearly dropped my phone in horror after I saw this. 2 massive feet were pointed straight at me. They were unbelievably large, way too large to be human. The tops of them were covered with matted brown and gray hair, while the toes were of pale purplish colored flesh, with toenails that were long, ragged, and yellow. I barely had time to notice the grotesque feet of this creature when it took notice of the light and let out a monstrous growl that shattered the silence of the pitch-black room. It sounded like a growl that came straight from hell. It was a primal, guttural, inhuman voice. The noise was deafening. My terror had completely overtaken me as I fell onto the floor and prepared to meet my doom at the hands of this beast. I closed my eyes as I heard it begin to pound on the door, cracking noises indicating that it was getting closer on every strike to breaking the stall open and getting its probably equally grotesque hands on me. Just when I thought I was a dead man, the monster had quieted down and seized its assault on the stall door. I opened my eyes. I was still alive. For now. It was then that I heard another familiar sound from the other side of the room. Those heavy slapping footsteps. There's 2 of them? I thought, as terror pierced every muscle in my body as I lay limp on the floor. I heard the second set of footsteps grow closer. As I prepared to meet my fate, where I'd no doubt be torn in half by 2 forest beasts, that's when the face-off happened. All I heard was 2 creatures growling at each other, going back and forth as if they locked in some sort of display of alpha male aggression. After several exchanges, they made their move. I heard the sound of flesh hitting flesh and bodies slamming up against the walls. I flicked my flashlight back on and pointed it towards the noise as I looked from under the stall. The 2 creatures were locked in a life and death melee. They were growling inhumanly as they pushed each other back and forth, blood spilling onto the floor for what I imagined was them clawing and biting at each other in this life and death struggle. As their battle continued, one began to back away out of the entrance to the men's room, and the other followed in a frantic sprint. I still heard their inhuman growls as their battle continued outside, until their voices trailed off into a barely audible drone in the woods. As terrified as I was, I got to my feet and exited the stall. I pointed the light from my phone against the floor. There was dark red blood and stuff of grayish-brown fur all over the floor. My truck tire screeched, and I was carried out of the entrance and back onto the highway. Wait, I was so scared I think I forgot to mention that I sprinted back out and ran towards my car. Anyways, I was covered in sweat and hyperventilating, having narrowly escaped a horrible death at the hands of some primal beast from a forgotten era. I sped the rest of the way to my destination in New York. I arrived and checked into a hotel. I sat at the bar and downed several scotches before even dropping my bags in the room. My rattled nerves settled down eventually, and I made my way to my room. I lied on the bed, sleepless, but I was definitely sure of two things. I was not taking that route back home, and I was never stopping at a rest stop ever again. And for anybody listening to this, if you ever decide to stop at a rest stop one day, be careful. Really careful.